Welcome to the Museum of the City of New York. My name is Fran Rosenfeld, and I'm the Director of Public Programs here. I'm delighted that tonight we are kicking off Season 2 of Smile, It's Your Close-Up, New York's Documentaries. Yeah, our nonfiction film series co-programmed with Jessica Green and Ito Choi and the Maisels Documentary Center. We're really thrilled to be starting on Season 2. And we'll be doing a whole rollout of 7 more programs to come between now and July 2018. So please check our website, mcny.org/smile. The Maisels also has the lineup online. And check out all the amazing screenings that are coming up, followed by conversations in the next year. And tonight we are thrilled to screen Metropolitan Avenue, a 1985 16mm film that documents a group of women, Polish, Italian, African American, in 1970s Brooklyn, who come together to protest changes to their neighborhood. It was one of the first documentaries, Metropolitan Avenue, to ever air on public television on the POV program, TV's longest running premiere showcase for nonfiction films. Following the film, Jessica Green, who you will hear from in just a second, the cinema director at Maisels, will sit down for a roundtable conversation with a really fascinating group of people. We have director of the film, Noschese. We have 2 neighborhood activists featured in the film who are here to talk to us, Diane Jackson and Marie Lianza. We have Mark Weiss, supervising producer of Metropolitan Avenue at POV. And they are all going to be joined by 2 scholars and activists, Miriam Greenberg and Penny Lewis, who are co-editors of a brand new book called The City is the Factory: New Solidarities and Spatial Strategies in an Urban Age. And this is an amazing new anthology of essays which touches on many of the issues that the film raises. And Penny and Miriam will stick around a little bit afterwards to sign copies of their new book and a couple other books there in the back. So please be sure to check that out. Quick thank you to 6 Point Brewery for their generous donation of beer to Season 1 and first of Season 2 of Smile. And beer is available at the back refreshments table during the film. There are also Twizzlers. I would also like to extend a special thanks to Elena Rossi-Snook at the New York Public Library for the Performing Arts, and to our promotional partners for tonight's event, including the Center for Place, Culture, and Politics at the CUNY Graduate Center, the Center for Social Innovation, Community Voices Heard, and the Global Urban Futures Project. We really appreciate their support. And I would now like to, before I welcome Jessica Green, say one more thing, which is that if you have any seat next to you that is not taken, please move in, because we have a more limited number of seats tonight due to the projector. And so rather than having people climb over you to get to that middle seat, please just move in now. It would be much appreciated. There's some seats I see all on the left. And I'd now like to welcome my colleague Jessica Green, cinema director at Maisels, to say a few words before the film.
Welcome, everybody. I'm going to keep this really, really brief because we need to get to this film. And this film, oh my God, it's one of my all-time favorites. It's one of the greatest documentaries ever made. It is a love letter to so many things I care about, especially women. The women in this film, yes, this is a women's night. Amazing, amazing women in this film. And I'm really happy to be doing this tonight, to be showing this film in part 2 of Smile, It's Your Close-Up, because Brooklyn got the short shift in part 1. So, you know, Brooklyn gets a lot of shine, right? So it's all right. But in part 2, we're getting right to it, the epicenter. This is a film about, you know, a neighborhood, obviously, that has rapidly transformed, you know, Williamsburg, Greenpoint. So it's a fascinating, fascinating look at this community. Fran talked about the panel. We're just going to, you know, get into it after the film. I'm not going to get so into the panel now. We'll talk to everybody afterwards. Just really quickly want to thank Ross, our projectionist in the back. Go, Ross. We're showing this on glorious, lovely 16mm film, the way it was intended to be seen. Very exciting. And I also just want to add that Mark from POV was actually the executive producer of POV and one of the founders of POV. So just want to make that correction. And thanks to POV for co-sponsoring and presenting this night. Again, this is the first program in Smile at Your Close-Up, part 2. Everything is on the museum's website or on Maisels' website, maisels.org. If you haven't been there, please check out our website. We are a movie theater in Central Harlem. We are a school for documentary filmmaking in Central Harlem. We have a donate button right on our homepage. Press it. Just press it, right? Okay. So without further ado, we're going to start the show. Metropolitan Avenue, incredible film, enjoy. We'll talk afterwards. Thank you. All right. So we're going to get started. How was that? Isn't that an awesome film? I've seen it so many times, but it's moving every time. It's so powerful and so moving. So we're just gonna do, I'm gonna do a few questions with you guys, and then I really want to open it up to the audience and leave enough time for that. And I just want to add, so I don't forget, following the discussion, we're gonna be selling Miriam and Penny's books in the back. The City is a Factory, and they're gonna be signing them. So just keep that in mind after the discussion. Yeah, so what I'm going to do first is just ask you guys to introduce yourself more in depth and just, state your full name and just share, a little bit more about your relationship to the film. I know you guys haven't seen the whole film in quite a while, so I'm really curious about, impressions you have after seeing it in full. After so many years, maybe you could each share a little bit of that. So why don't we start with you, Marie? Just, if you could introduce yourself and share a little bit about yourself. Thanks.
Okay. My name is Marie Lienza, and I live in Greenpoint, Williamsburg area all my life. Believe it or not, the same house I was born. My children, I have 2 children and 2 grandchildren. Still live in the community, still work for the organization for 42 years. The film I thought was very exciting. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people, most of them really have passed away, but they're looking down on us and they're giving us a push to still fight in the community because nothing really has changed, really, because looking at the film, seeing the people fighting for issues that they believe in, and that's what I'm still doing. I belong to a planning board, the CB1 planning board. I belong to a lot of organizations, and I'm still out there fighting. And sometimes my children say, when am I going to stop? I'm never going to stop, because that's my life. Okay. And that's it. I'm very happy, and I was excited to see this film.
Were there any different impressions that you had seeing it in full this many years later?
Yeah, how young I was.
You're still pretty young.
Yeah, and looking at the film and seeing how young I was, I'm looking at my grandchild and my daughter and all. I said, they look like me. But it was exciting. It was to see the people. My co-worker Miriam that I used to work with, that she has passed away. And loved Diane Jackson. I wish Sally Fisher was here because she was a real fighter in the community. And it was just great. I enjoyed it.
Before we go on to Diane, I just want you guys to note the unplanned matching animal print. You know what they say about women in animal prints, wild women. This was unplanned, so.
We're fighters.
Good evening. My name is Diane Jackson, and I got involved with this crazy organization back in 1975. Anybody here remember the CETA program? We all met each other under the CETA program, and we all worked for different organizations. The organization that I was affiliated with was the Cooper Park Houses Tenant Association. Cooper Park is a public housing development in the Greenpoint, Williamsburg area. And I started working there as a volunteer and under the leadership of great women that were in this film. Mildred Tootie, Mildred Johnson, Margaret Carnegie. Those women were my mentors. And I used to be the young one running around putting the flyers for them and telling people to come to meetings. And I sort of learned a lot from just being around them. Then I started getting involved. At that time, my mom was my babysitter, and my mom was pretty active. And then one day she was like, I'm putting the kids in daycare because I'm not babysitting anymore. And she wanted to continue to do the things that she liked to do. So she says, they're having a meeting in a daycare center and you gotta go. So that's where I got started first, in daycare. And from there, it just led into many other things. One of the things that, they talked a lot about fighting struggles just locally in the neighborhood, but there were so many other things that I had the opportunity to be a part of. I was involved with the domestic violence. I was the chair of the first shelter for battered women in the city of New York. Oh, wow. So that took, a lot of me. After so many years, I got involved in the labor movement, and I was a union activist. So just local stuff in the neighborhood led into bigger things. I had good teachers, and I learned a whole lot. One of the things that amazes me when I see this film, and I thought about today, is when Mildred Johnson is calling me from the window, Diane, we got to go to the meeting. We got to go to the meeting. And I said, oh, I'm waiting for the babysitter. Well, I'm waiting for the babysitter, and my daughter, Sharandria Jackson, and Tyreek, could you stand up for a minute, please? I was waiting for someone to take care of them so I can go to the meeting.
And now they know why.
Yes. So, as Marie said, looking at the film, I says, wow, I looked a lot younger, a lot broader. But it was really, it was fun doing it. And every time I see it, I was telling a story that I've seen the film so many times, but every time I look at it, I see something different that I didn't catch before. And it really was a pleasure doing it. It really was great. Thanks, Chris.
I'm Christine Noschese, and isn't it on? Yeah. And I made this film a long time ago, and it took a long time to make. It was a real big process making the film. It wasn't just like an ordinary film. We had community meetings of all the different groups. We discussed what the subject matter of the film was going to entail. There were so many wonderful community activists that I was going crazy trying to put so many people in, and there was so much. I mean, thank God for the web these days. If I had the web then, I would have put all the interviews on the internet, because there was so much stuff that I couldn't get into this one piece. That was so wonderful, just trying to make a story out of this wonderful community. And I'm very emotionally involved in the film. I wanted to change what I believed was the stereotype of working class women at that time, Edith Bunker kind of thing. And I wanted to show the community from an insider's point of view and not look at it like the victims of a neighborhood. And I wanted everybody to look good. And I was just telling people earlier that when we had to shoot Margaret Carnegie's birthday party, I blew my whole New York State Council of the Art grant on lighting the place so everybody didn't look like they were green, because everybody was dressed in tuxedos and long dresses, so I wanted that to look a certain way. It was a labor of love, and to me it also was an organizing film. I was an organizer in the community, and I wanted people to come together. And so the process of making the film was almost like meeting with people and discussing the issue. But that's what I really wanted, was to make a film that would bring people together and understand the importance of community. That's me. Anything else?
Before we go to Mark, just to your point, Christine, I just want to add, I showed this movie once at the Maisel Cinema in a double feature with a documentary about pigeon breeding, and we had a whole group of pigeon breeders from the Bronx that came, and they would coo at the screen at the women. Because, the lighting was happening, the women are beautiful, and yeah, the pigeon breeders would actually coo at the screen. So just want to share that with you.
Okay.
So, hi, I'm Mark Weiss. I just want to say first how I was crying through half the film. It's been a long time since I've seen it, and I just love this film. I just love Diane and Marie and all the women in it, and the real incredible depth of feeling that people have for the community in which they live. My role in the film was relatively minor, but I have a good story to tell a little later on, maybe when we have a second round. Actually, this film led directly to the founding of POV, but I'll tell you that story later. I was just kind of support. I was support for Christine. She was already making the film when I met her, and I think I was kind of like a cheerleader and helped along the way. And then when the film was finished, I really wanted to get it seen as widely as possible. So I got very involved in distribution and opening the film theatrically in New York and a few other things. But those are other stories. I just want to say that I'm grateful to have my name on a film like this. I think it's really so wonderful. 30 years later, it still lives, has so much to say to all of us.
Hello, it's on. So I'm Penny Lewis, and I teach at the Murphy Institute for Labor Studies and Worker Education at the City University of New York. And I have no connection to the film directly, but Miriam and I were invited to be here because we wrote this book, The City is the Factory, which, Marie, when you started off saying, this is still going on, this is still the fight, the book that we edited and that we contributed to is talking about how this is still the fight. And in fact, the work, I just want to agree with what you just said, Mark. The work that you all did in Greenpoint, Williamsburg was, completely paved the way. And it wasn't just you guys. There were communities organizing in cities that were being disinvested and destroyed and shrunk through planned shrinkage and losing their tax base and being deindustrialized and all of the things that were happening to cities at the time. You fought for community and defined community in this way and showed what can happen, what kind of solidarities can be created across race, across ethnicity and class. So Marie, you were telling the story before that when you were trying to get funding for this, that people were like, community? You want funding about a movie about community? They couldn't even understand it. And 40 years later, thank goodness for the work you did, because there are so many groups that do this kind of work, and our book is looking at the continuation of this kind of community-based organizing, but we show how it's expanded and how workplace organizing has kind of picked up a lot of the lessons that the community-based organizing kind of paved the way on. And we focus on the right to the city struggles that exist not just in the United States, but around the world, and how cities today, which are very different than the city of 40 years ago, still have these fights. Now it might be fights about where to invest, and for whom, and what kind of development, as opposed to trying to save the things that you have. But it's a very similar struggle that demands the same kinds of solidarities and the same kinds of constant fight that you guys showed. So I think we were invited to reflect on the work today.
Hi, my name is Miriam Greenberg, and I co-edited the volume with Penny, and I teach sociology at UC Santa Cruz, but I lived for 20 years in New York, and this is just making me reflect actually a lot on my time in New York and sort of what led to me becoming an urban sociologist and being interested in these issues, and working living and working in Williamsburg, Brooklyn at El Puente with Jessica, actually, Green. And running a program called El Puente Television, where we would screen Metropolitan Avenue for young people in the program who were becoming videographers, and trying to really document community organizing in Williamsburg at a time when, I think as we were talking about earlier, and you kind of alluded to, Christine, there were a lot of really negative representations of Williamsburg, Greenpoint, and Brooklyn in general, and the communities there, both in some documentaries that were produced, as well as in one of the projects that we had with the young videographers was to go out and film people who were filming on location in the neighborhood, and how they would often like kind of destroy the block and bring in old cars from the 70s and try to shoot crime dramas on the streets of Williamsburg. So that was one of the issues, was that the representation of organizing that had been going on for generations was not being seen sufficiently. And so we were really, and many videographers inspired and documentary filmmakers inspired by this film, and I'm just so honored to have the opportunity to be on this panel. And in addition, we were, and alluding to the book, dealing with and representing and reflecting on a transformation of Williamsburg, Brooklyn, at a time when there was this shift from an era of disinvestment and decline to one of reinvestment and growth and gentrification and displacement. And so, that's maybe something we can talk about a little bit more, about how the nature of organizing and coalition building and so forth had to address these new struggles.
Thank you, guys. Well, all right, so my first follow-up question is for you, Christine. I just wanted you to share, if you could, a little bit. You brought up, actually, something that I wanted to reference, Edith Bunker. Hopefully this is cool that I'm sharing this, that, in the early days, when the film first was on the festival circuit, that there was a note that came back that described the film as related. A bunch of Edith Bunkers. That was a note on the film when it was submitted to a festival. A bunch of Edith Bunkers. So I just would like you to talk a little bit about how the film was received and understood when it first was made and released, and how that has changed over the years, and just talk a little bit about that, because I was just fascinated by that, and it just seemed like there was a way in which some people didn't get it.
It came back when the people screened films in those days. It was on videotape.
Yeah.
And there was a little post-it, a bunch of Edith Bunkers on the videotape when it came back, when they gave
By
it
accident,
back to me.
but yeah.
By accident. Sundance.
Yeah.
Sundance, of all places. Anyway.
Sundance didn't get the memo, apparently. So
they didn't get the memo. It was very hard to get funding for the film. People didn't understand what the film was about. We finally Ida Sussa, who you've worked with, helped write the final proposal to get the film funded, and made it much more academic and theoretical than I had certainly done. And that was really important. And Mark helped a lot. I mean. Through the whole process. And also things were a little different then in terms of getting funding. I mean, there was a National Endowment of the Humanities. Mm-hmm. There was a concern, it was a Carter administration philosophy, and there were filmmakers on the panel that liked it, and academics that was sensitive to this kind of thing. Some famous filmmakers actually on the panel. Judith Reichardt was on the panel and liked the film. And I don't think it would have been fun. Actually, it was rejected the first time, even though the panel accepted the film. Do you remember this? The panel accepted the film. They voted for the film unanimously, and the staff rejected their decision-making. And I think it was Mark who told, I didn't know who was on the panel, Judith, anyway, that the panel was, that's happened. And then we resubmitted it with more heavyweights like Gutman and everybody else on it, so that so we had more senior scholars. And that's when the proposal that Ida wrote. And we got more money that time anyway. But it was a very different environment, and I think that it's important for people to understand that in terms of making films in the United States. Yeah. I mean,
and women making films.
And women making films.
I want people to understand that too.
People of certain class backgrounds making films. I think that people, when we get into this whole idea of funding for the arts and funding for the humanities, I would have never gotten to make this film if the National Endowment of the Humanities didn't fund it. And it was because there was a panel of peers that viewed the material. It was just as simple as that. And now, Now, and that has changed so drastically through the years, so that the country isn't getting the filmmakers that really should be making
So change for the
films.
better.
No, I don't think, I think it's, the National Documentary has changed for the worse.
Okay.
And they don't even fund films that are
Right.
contemporary, it's only historical films,
Right.
safe films.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so, I mean, they'll fund Civil War, but they won't fund
Right.
anything like
Something
this anymore.
contemporary.
No,
Yeah.
it's not, and they give much less money than they used to
Yeah.
give. So that's a whole other,
Right. Yeah,
a whole other
sure.
area in getting to make a film. And like, if you're gonna use lighting, if we shot on film, but if you're gonna use lighting and hire professional people to
Right.
shoot things, you
Yeah.
have to pay them something.
Right.
And the film took a long time to edit. It was a very
Right.
hard film to edit.
Yeah.
And Karen Sanderson, who's here as the associate producer, she was very instrumental in helping edit the film with the editor.
Right.
And it was a struggle.
Yeah.
And Mark was was supportive all the time. So
Yeah.
it was like that was one of the joys of it.
Yeah, well, I just, again, my love for it is renewed every time I see it. It's just, it remains so powerful with every viewing. It's so moving and beautiful. You made such an incredible film, and
I'm
thank
pretty
you
emotional.
so much for it.
I'm about
So-
as emotional as this
Yeah.
film.
So, Mark, that's a good segue. Could you share the story of how POV wouldn't exist if not for Metropolitan Avenue, perhaps?
Sure.
That's a great story.
I love this story, so I'm very happy to. I emailed Jessica and asked me to tell this story. So, as Christine said, when film was finished in '85. She submitted it to. It wasn't even called the Sundance Film Festival then. It was still the U.S. Film Festival. It was just about to become Sundance, and they rejected it. And I was really pissed off. And I don't know how I got the phone number of the guy who was the director of the festival, a guy named Tony Stafford. And I called him up and I said, how can you reject this film? There's so few films about working class people, particularly working class women who are organizing themselves across race lines, and this is an inspiring film. This film has to be in the festival. You've got to put it in the festival. And he kind of, he was trying to kind of talk me down because I was pretty steamed. And he said, well, it's too late. We can't really put it in the festival, but if you want, you could come. There's like a place that in an arts center, and I'll help you figure out where to get a projector, and you can hand out some flyers, and people can come and see the film. And I said, I don't know why. I said, okay, I'm going to do that. And I somehow, and I said, but it shouldn't be just this one film. I should put together a little program. And I actually pulled together 4 or 5 films all about working class women. And I made a little program that looked like a page out of the Sundance Film Festival program. And had, I forget how I got this together. Maybe Michael LeBrun, who's in the audience, who's a brilliant graphics designer, maybe he helped me put it together. And I went out to Park City and set up a projector in the basement of this Kimball Art Center on Main Street in Park City. And I tried to hand these leaflets out, and nobody was coming to the films. It was kind of, and I'm sitting there, and there are 5 people in the audience, and why am I doing this? And after a little while, I said, okay, I'm just going to go see what's happening, and I'll maybe see some of the films, and I'll see some of the panel discussions. So one of the panels was a discussion, was representatives from public TV stations in Europe, and one representative from the U.S. was a guy named David Fanning, who was the executive producer of Frontline. At the time, Frontline was 3 or 4 years old. The independent film community here in sorry, this is a long story, but the independent film community, I was very, very active in organizing some of the early organizations in independent film in the early 70s. One of them was called AIVF, Association of Independent Video and Filmmakers. I was on the board of it, and we had been kind of going after public television, which had really not done a good job of showing American independent films at all. They would show one documentary kind of once every 6 months. They would go out to the stations. Stations would program at all different times of the day or night. If anybody you couldn't get reviews because it wasn't really a national broadcast. Filmmakers usually had to raise money themselves to do publicity. And they had to make the phone calls to press people to try and get them to write articles about it. And it was just terrible, terrible system. And public television was saying, well, Frontline, they do independent films because Frontline hired a couple of independent filmmakers to make films for them, but they weren't independent films. They were films that were controlled by the executive producer, by David Fanning. He was the one who had the final cut. And if you're an independent, independence means you have the ability to realize your vision the way you see as appropriate. So we were all, railing on public television. David Fanning is on this panel, and there are people there from Britain and I forget which countries who were actually buying a lot of American independent documentaries and showing them throughout Europe. And the guy from Channel 4, which is the second British channel, said, we love American documentaries, American independent documentaries. We bought so many of them that we just had to make a series just for them. And David Fanning, here's an audience mostly of independent filmmakers. David Fanning was trying to kind of show how he was really with the program. And he said, there ought to be a series like that on PBS. I've often thought there ought to be a series for independent documentaries on public television. So after the panel ended, I went up, I introduced myself to David Fanning. I said, hi, I'm Mark, and I come out of the independent film community. How do you think we might be able to make a series like that happen? And I have to say, to his credit, he said, let's go have a beer. And so he and I went, and I grabbed a couple of other people from the independent, several other organizations, and the conversation we had in that bar in January of 1986 was a conversation that led to David introduced me to key people in PBS and several of the big stations, WGBH, WNET in New York. And we managed, and he gave me a lot of advice and mentoring.
And the rest is history.
And we managed to make it happen.
Yeah, that's a great
and it
story.
was because of Metropolitan Avenue. That was the only reason I was there.
That's quite a story. Thank you for sharing that so much, David. You obviously knew about all of that,
No,
right? You didn't know about that?
No, I
Okay,
didn't
that's
know
amazing.
that
That's pretty
part.
fascinating.
No,
Wow.
I knew that he took the film there.
Yeah.
And I knew because he took the film, Bonk took the film
Yeah.
there, it was like all these
Yeah, yeah.
intricacies of getting independent
Yeah.
films shown. Sheila Benson from the LA
Sure.
Times saw it, and she said if she
Yeah.
would write a positive review if it was in the theaters.
Right.
And Mark got it in theaters because she said she
Right.
would write a positive
Very
review.
cool.
And so, I mean, it's just so, it's a job, it's a whole world in itself,
Yep.
getting a film to an audience.
For sure.
It's really, I mean, that's what, I made a film that I thought was going to be accessible.
Right.
That was one of my goals, to make
Yeah.
an accessible film for lots of people
Yeah.
across class lines and that people could identify with. And then it was like so hysterical. It was like so frightening to me because I just didn't think of how I was going to get it to these people except going to community
Right.
group, carrying the film with me and projecting it all around the country. And that's how people had to do it. I mean, we just didn't have a way
But
to
here
get
we
it
are
to an
35
audience.
years later.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to switch gears a little bit, and one
And by
last
the way,
question.
this year is the 30th anniversary of POV.
Yes, this year is the 30th anniversary of POV, yeah. Very exciting. Yeah, and this program is in collaboration with POV, co-presented by POV, and we're so proud to be doing that, and POV is like absolutely amazing. So just one last question for Miriam, Penny, Diane, and Marie. Let's switch gears a little bit, then we'll open it up for a few questions from the audience. So the struggle then, Metropolitan Avenue, community organizing then, versus what's happening today. Let's just talk a little bit about that, and then we're going to open it up. Miriam, set it off.
Yeah, well, as I was saying, and I may not have mentioned, so El Puente is in the Latino part of Williamsburg, the south side, mostly Puerto Rican community, as well as Hasidic and Jewish and Polish Slavic. And one of the things we were observing at the time, of course, was that there was a sense that a lot of these amazing organizing efforts that were going on and that were, we were inspired by Metropolitan Avenue and that were aligned with a lot of the things happening in other parts of the community, were helping to, there was a big environmental justice aspect to this, so cleaning up toxins, having really powerful block associations and street tree plantings and community gardens and all these other wonderful things that were helping to beautify and clean up a neighborhood that people perceived was being taken away from them at the same time, and that was rapidly gentrifying and in which subsequent generations could no longer afford to stay. And so that, I think, became an impetus for new kinds of organizing that had to do with anti-displacement organizing, anti-gentrification organizing. But really, I think the legacy of this earlier generation was and continues to be so important in terms of creating alliances between longtime residents and people who have deep roots and who have this deep knowledge of organizing in these communities, and many people who are really struggling to remain or to enter and to stay in these communities. So I think one of the themes of our book is really looking at a condition that many people in this era face in cities like New York.
Globally, right? We're talking around the world.
And globally, and we look at housing struggles in Sao Paulo, Brazil, that are similar. Struggles there's a kind of a somewhat of an emphasis on Latin America in the book, as well as cities around the United States and in Europe and beyond, and in Istanbul and so forth, of people trying to assert their right to the city, who have very precarious conditions of housing, as well as precarious conditions of employment. And so as opposed to homeowners, as well as people in public housing who had kind of somewhat secure housing, albeit housing that was under threat, as well as conditions that, and services and so forth that needed to be defended. There's a new generation of organizers who are trying to establish roots in communities and are having very major challenges in doing so. And so how do we create coalitions between, as for instance in some of the groups that we feature in the book, like the Crown Heights Tenants Union, between longtime tenants and new residents new renters who are moving in, and who might be seen as part of a gentrifying wave, but are themselves also often very precariously housed and employed. And so how do we create coalitions between these generations, between also community-based organizations and the labor movement? And those are a lot of the focuses of the book. How do we learn from and expand upon the kinds of coalitions that were created in this earlier era?
Thank you. Do you want to add anything, Penny?
I don't think I have anything to add. I will add one thing, which is the Crown Heights Tenants Union, which I'm not sure if everyone in the audience is familiar with, and I'm not sure how much.
And there's some people from Crown Heights in the audience that I know of, so yeah, share anything about that.
Well, so this one group has, Miriam just described it, but one of the struggles that they're currently involved with right now, and it's not just their organization, but a number of organizations in central Brooklyn, is the Bedford Armory development. And there's a community meeting tomorrow night to talk about this. And this is a fight about, what kind of investment, and who is it for? And the community is demanding that the investment be 100% affordable housing. And, the model that we see and that the groups that we look at in our book, the model that we see across the world is, development for the wealthy, development, for the 1%, kind of high-end, trickle-down city development. And the incredible inspiration that you all showed and that the groups that we profile as well show is the extent to which workers and residents have been successful. We also look at how difficult it is. There's the win that you guys had with with 94, but there are the losses, the houses that were torn down, and there's this balance between how much we can win, at the city level and, what's available to us to create that leverage. But in Crown Heights, I think we might have a victory at Bedford. I mean, I'm feeling somewhat hopeful. I'm going to the meeting tomorrow night. So that's a snippet from today.
So, yeah, Diane and Marie, if you could, just the struggle then, the struggle now, and any words of wisdom for the next generation trying to, carry the baton, anything you could, share. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, it's a whole, like a reincarnation. I retired in 2012, and I moved out of the neighborhood. I currently live in Philadelphia, but I am still very much indirectly and sometimes directly at what happens in Cooper Park. I served as the president of the Tenants Association for over 25 years in Cooper Park houses, so I'm still very much connected to Cooper Park. I now live in Philadelphia, and where things are just a bit different. And I live in a community that, it's mostly homeowners. I see some things, and when I first moved there, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't stand it here. I want to go home. I don't like it here. But then I looked around and I saw things in the neighborhood that I knew had Diane Jackson written on it. I said, no, this neighborhood has, it's not the greatest. It has some improvements to be done, but that's what I'm all about. I make neighborhoods. So currently, I am the president of the Homeowners Association. I've been elected the president of the Homeowners Association, and I'm trying to organize a board of directors for a youth center and a senior center. And I'm going to all the meetings. I got to know, what helped me out in New York is I knew everybody, but I didn't know anybody in Philadelphia. And I was introduced to a program where they had all of the heads of all the city agencies and the mayors, and everybody came out. So I made some real strong connections there. And then luckily, I worked very closely with my elected officials in New York. And Nydia Velasquez, who was my congresswoman, got in touch with the congresswoman from my area in Pennsylvania.
Nice. Wow.
And said, you need to get to know this woman. So he's sort of like opened some doors for me too. So it's like, like you try to retire, you say you're finished, you're not gonna do it anymore, but you walk out there and you see something and you know you can do something about it, and it's just a part of you. You gotta get involved.
It's like The Godfather. They pull you back. They pull you back in. I'm still involved in my community, and I'm with political. I'm an activist, and I am an organizer, and I've always been an organizer, and I'm still fighting. There's a lot of issues to be done, that need to be completed. But it takes a lot of people to be part of that. And it's very, very, very difficult because the young generation coming in, it's like, like we have rent stabilization and the rent control and the evictions and like the daycare and the senior center that we almost lost it, but we had a fight. And the young generation that with their daycare, with their children, they were part of it with the fight, and also they're part of the community also. They have stakes in the community. But it never changed. The banks are the same as they always are. They invest outside the community. And you have to fight the banks, with redlining, which I'm still involved in that. And again, the only thing I can say to the community and to people here is that if you believe in something, you have to fight for it, and you have to be supported for others. That's my belief.
Thank you. All right, so on that note, let's take a couple of audience questions. Just wait a sec, they're gonna, Museum staff's gonna bring over a mic for you. Great, thank you.
Hello? Is this on? Okay. So how do you feel about gentrification, and what happened to people you know as a result of it?
Is that for anybody in particular?
Yes, these two ladies.
How do I feel
About
it?
gentrification. How do you guys feel about
I mean, there's a lot of people, the young people have moved out because they can't afford to pay the rents. And high rises are coming into our community, and we have to fight for affordable housing. And I'm not really crazy about it, but the thing is, that's what's happening, and you just have to fight to make sure that there are apartments and buildings that are going to have community people in there, and the rents have to be enough so that they don't move out. So, you know, it's very difficult.
A lot of long-time residents that's lived in the community for years are being displaced because they're coming in with a lot of luxury high-rise home buildings now. I remember most of the streets in Williamsburg, Greenpoint were quiet, tree-lined, 1- and 2-family homes, and now, boom, a skyscraper shows up in the middle of the block. They're making these big, tall buildings all over, and it's displacing a lot of the people that grew up and lived in that community all their lives, that's been involved in the community, and they'd like to stay there. However, they cannot afford the rents. They can't afford the rents. And developers are not interested in low-income housing. And most of the people that are there are family-structured people that have lived there more than 30, 40 years. And so they're bringing in a whole different, a different group of people who sometimes don't buy into the community. They just like the area because we're 3 stops from Manhattan, one direction, and 5 stops from Queens in another direction. It's an ideal location to live in, good public transportation, excellent schools in the community. So, people are coming in to be there, but they're not really buying into preparing, staying there, and fighting to keep it the way that we fought to make it the way it is.
Yeah, I went there. I had this idea that I wanted to make Metropolitan Avenue then and now and I filmed.
And you couldn't.
I filmed Diane and Marie, and then I got this really depressed feeling because I was so different than I had remembered it. And I felt like, what was I going to say in this film? Because I wanted the community to be winning, and people were still fighting. But I just saw it as a different place. And even though Marie took me to the Italian person downstairs, and Diane told me about her daughters and everybody staying in Cooper Park, I kept on thinking, what do I have to say? I knew I was making an organizing film at first, but what am I going to be saying about this neighborhood now? It was quite a shock to me. And speaking to the woman who is in here, Sally, I interviewed her also. She really did not feel she fit into when she moved out. Right. She moved out. She did not feel comfortable in another neighborhood. She felt a real sense of lack of community, and it was very sad to see. And she felt that she wasn't being accepted in certain ways. It was like something, it was like suburbia wasn't for her, and that was in her interview. And it was very. She just didn't fit in. She belonged back in her neighborhood. And she was, when she came back to her neighborhood, and her daughters said this to me, that they didn't feel like it was their neighborhood anymore. They felt like outsiders in their own neighborhood. And I sort of, from my own experience of growing up in Brooklyn in what is now called Carroll Gardens, when I was a kid it was called Red Hook. I get that feeling myself. Like it's like this isn't my neighborhood anymore, and I can't afford to live where I grew up, either.
Yeah, and everything you guys are saying kind of speaks to what Miriam and Penny were bringing up before about how important it is for newcomers and old-timers in neighborhoods to be able to figure out how to organize together and find common ground, and how that has changed because of gentrification, the kind of organizing that needs to happen. Other questions? I think we had one in the front, yeah. Yeah, just project. You got it.
I have a sibling who's running for city council, and it's a pity that he's not here to see this film because, as Stone's very networks among the people in the community in the projects in Parkville and Stapleton on the North Shore and elsewhere by the ferry area on Staten Island to create the networks. And I wonder, is it because people maybe apathetic or maybe they're just hopeless, they're losing interest because they're being kicked out of their homes, that they do not see a reason to invest their energy in mobilizing politically. I wonder what strategies do you use in your community to create the networks and to organize, while at the same time people are being forced out of that very community where you're advocating and for which you are advocating.
All I can say is that you have to get people to vote, because that's the power. And the thing is and what it is that I don't care what politician it is or who it is, if they see a block of people that go out to vote, your community is going to get what you want. If you stay home and say let the other person do it, then they're going to go somewhere else. So you need to make sure that you organize enough of people and that you show them that you have the power to get people out to vote, because that's what it's all about.
And let everybody know when you won a victory.
And that's right.
If you guys want to add anything just based on like the research that you did and the work that you did, or looking at strategies globally, like I don't know if you have anything you want to share on that.
I'm going to add something that isn't really necessarily in our book, but I think is on stage, which is, what you just said, Diane, about let everyone know when you have a victory. I mean, it takes, when people feel hopeless and when people feel despairing, it's very hard to move, I mean, I'm coming, I teach in a labor studies institute, and so we talk about organizing all the time. And, it takes people who have the faith and the commitment, and sometimes just a couple of people, to get it going. And when those people take those risks and move forward, someone in the film said, you have the power. Like, don't tell people that you don't have the power. You have the power. You are the power. Everyone in this room is. When you have leaders and community members who feel that commitment and who are willing to take those few steps, it's amazing the kind of electric effect that can have. I've seen that in my own organizing. My students see it in their organizing. We saw it in the movie. And so it's, instead of feeling like it's an impossible question, you start small and you start, with something winnable, and you start with something that can take a step, Okay,
I'm gonna take one more question. Did you?
There's a woman over there.
I want to thank you for making this film, because I'll start by saying that Marie Leanza is my aunt, and my whole life I grew up hearing, well, where's Aunt Marie? She's at a meeting. I got a meeting. I got to go to a meeting. And I never understood what she was doing till tonight. So I really want to thank you, and I'm so proud.
I want to thank you guys too. All right, that's a good note to end on. Let's all give them a round of applause. Marie, Diane, Christine, Mark, Penny, Miriam.